Despite the coronavirus, the 2020 presidential election is now in full swing. We thought now would be a good time to start a new series which we'll post once or twice a month on this channel. We're calling it The State of the Election. In this series, we'll be taking a look at what's going on in the 2020 US presidential election and how current events will impact the election. On April 8th, Bernie Sanders suspended his presidential campaign, leaving former Vice President Joe Biden as the presumptive Democratic nominee. With the ongoing crisis and Biden's ability to hold campaign rallies being put on hold, the former vice president has tried to make up for his lack of public appearances by holding virtual town halls and constant interviews, mostly with local news networks in battleground states. Fortunately for Biden, at the time of writing, he holds a 5.9% lead over the president, according to the Real Clear Politics average. However, he does have one big disadvantage. President Trump is holding daily briefings, giving him much more media exposure. While it obviously doesn't mean that President Trump will win, it does give him the opportunity to communicate better with voters. As a side note, it's worth keeping in mind that the president is not elected by a national vote, but by each state selecting electors to vote on their behalf in the Electoral College. So while national polling can help get a feel for the country's mood as a whole, the thing to really keep an eye on is swing state polling, as it's these state results which will determine the outcome of the election. Anyway, back to the bigger picture of the election. Joe Biden has also faced sexual assault allegations from Tara Reade, a former staffer in his office, when Joe Biden served as a senator from Delaware, with this story making headlines yet again. Last year, Reade and 7 other women accused Biden of inappropriate conduct, but sexual assault was not alleged until just a few weeks ago. Reade claims that she and Biden were alone when Biden forced himself on her. Reade claims out of respect for Biden, she did not name him in the police report she filed at the time. Some have drawn contrast with the allegations against now Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, claiming that the media is largely ignoring the current allegations, while they covered Kavanaugh's case quite extensively. Earlier in the week, footage of a Larry King Live episode from 1993 showed a woman calling in about her daughter having problems with her boss, who was a prominent senator. Reade claims that the voice on the phone was that of her mother, and records do show that her mother lived in the area that the caller called from. But, to be fair, her name wasn't given at the time. Following the realisation of the tape, multiple people came forward claiming that Reade told them about the incident before she went public with her story. Now, before we get a whole load of comments accusing us of bashing Biden, we're not. And we're not here to take sides. Our interest is only in the effect that this will have on the election. As Reade filed a complaint with the DC police, this may not be the last we hear of it. And obviously, it could be of grave consequence to Biden's campaign, especially if it does gain increased traction with the media. This is also not accounting for President Trump's campaign attacking Biden over the allegations. So, what comes next in the election? Well, probably the next big event will be the announcement of Biden's running mate. Biden has announced that a selection panel will be chosen by May 1st. This doesn't necessarily mean anything, however. In the 2000 presidential election, for example, then Texas Governor George W. Bush appointed Defense Secretary Dick Cheney to head a panel to select his running mate, and Bush ended up tapping Cheney himself for the position. If you want to know more about Biden's running mate selection, then check out the video we made on the topic. There's a link to it in the description below. Anyway, once that's happened, the two-party conventions will take place to formally nominate their candidates for president and vice president. Thus far, the Democratic National Committee has postponed their convention by a little over a month to August 17th to 20th, while the Republicans haven't changed their dates of August 24th to 27th. Now, there's one problem that Biden must contend with in regard to the conventions. Remember the sexual assault allegations we mentioned earlier? Well, some have begun calling for Biden to withdraw from the race. While this isn't likely to happen, it is still theoretically possible that the convention could nominate someone other than Biden. Needless to say, Biden would have a very serious problem if these calls for his withdrawal spread. But, as I said, it's not likely to happen. Obviously, as of right now, the biggest variable to the election is the pandemic. With states postponing primaries amid the crisis, the DNC Rules Committee is expected to meet and approve waivers to those primaries that fall after their June 9th deadline. The downside for Biden is that he won't actually capture enough delegates to clinch the nomination until June. At the time of writing, Biden held 1,305 of the required 1,991 delegates. It's also worth pointing out that while Senator Sanders has suspended his campaign and even endorsed Biden, he still remains on the ballot in the upcoming primaries. That means that Joe Biden won't automatically get all of the delegates from these contests, depending on Sanders' share of the votes. I say all of that because while Biden is the presumptive nominee, it's only because everyone else had dropped out, and not because of the required number of delegates. There are three factors affecting the election that we still need to consider: impeachment, the 2018 midterms, and the economy. So let's take them one by one, starting with impeachment. In a previous video, we explored the impact that impeachment would have on the election, and as we pointed out at the time, this is very new ground. In all three cases of previous impeachment, none resulted in the president going on to run for re-election, so we have no basis of comparison for how Trump's impeachment will affect the election. However, his impeachment did not result in a serious primary challenge, which means that for the most part, his party continues to be behind him. Not to mention the fact that Trump ended the impeachment with higher approval ratings than when it started. So all in all, the impeachment isn't likely to have a huge impact, especially when you consider the effect that impeachment had on the 1998 midterm elections for the Republicans. While still retaining control of both houses of Congress, they lost seats after they impeached Bill Clinton. While the 2018 midterms were successful for both parties, it may offer a clue for the 2020 election. The Democrats' seizure of the House of Representatives could be an indication of how Americans feel about Trump's first years in office. However, Democrats lost control of the House in the 2010 midterms, and then Barack Obama still managed to gain re-election. So while this definitely could be an indicator, it's not guaranteed. And while we're on the subject of Congress, it's worth noting that congressional elections are also occurring. How well Donald Trump and Joe Biden mobilize their parties could determine which has control of Congress in addition to the presidency. We'll especially keep an eye on the Senate. That's because the Senate holds an important role in getting judicial and cabinet nominees confirmed. While Republicans currently have a majority, several Republican senators are considered vulnerable, including Susan Collins of Maine, Cory Gardner in Colorado, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, and Martha McSally in Arizona. Montana Senator Steve Daines might not be vulnerable except for the entry of popular former Democratic Governor Steve Bullock, and Bullock's popularity could make the seat up for grabs in November. It's also worth pointing out that Democrats also have vulnerable senators as well, including Doug Jones of Alabama. As you can see, these Senate races will be something to keep an eye on to see who will gain control of the Senate. And lastly, the economy. Before the pandemic outbreak, the economy was obviously on the rise, with record unemployment and stock market numbers. That said, the question becomes, will voters hold Trump and his administration or the pandemic as responsible for the recent economic downturn? This is a question on which we can only speculate. For one thing, we don't even know the extent of the economic damage that the pandemic will have, and for another, we don't know how well the government will handle the road to recovery. So this will be something we will revisit rather frequently. We'll know more as states reopen and as the economy has a chance to react to the crisis. Anyway, once the conventions are over, the general election officially gets underway, with 3 presidential debates and 1 vice presidential debate, ultimately culminating in the election on November 3rd. Keep an eye out for our State of the Election series as the election progresses. You can also get involved in the conversation over on Discord. There's a link to our server down below, and by joining, you can take part in discussions about all kinds of topics, from US politics and their 2020 election, to gaming and philosophy. Join the approaching 2,000 people on the server today, who are discussing a variety of topics from a variety of perspectives. You can also discuss our videos, and if you're a patron, you can access super exclusive bonus channels where you can talk to Team TLDR and other patrons. You can check out the Discord by clicking the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we post a new video.